right, guys. My special guest tonight is Dr. Jill Stein. She has just recently announced that she is running for president. She's actually seeking the Green Party nomination for president for 2024. Jill, welcome back.
Great to be here, Sabby.
All right, Jill. So the last time you were here, I did ask you if you were considering running for political office again. At that point in time, you said that it was possible, right? So here we are. And you have announced that you are seeking the Green Party nomination for president for 2024. I think the first question that I have for you, which I think a lot of people want to know, you ran for president in 2012 and you ran in 2016. The political landscape this time around is a little bit different, meaning that when you ran before, we didn't have the war in Ukraine. We didn't have this war with Israel and Gaza, although the occupation was still an issue, but things are definitely more escalated now. And now we also have multiple candidates that are running outside of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, which it seems like people seem to be more excited about the candidates running outside of the two-party system than the candidates running within the two-party system this time around. I saw recent polls that showed that RFK Jr. is at like 22%. Another one said like 19%. Cornel West, I saw one poll has him at 8%, another one at like 3%, depends on which poll you're looking at. But these two candidates in particular are also getting a lot of attention from mainstream media, which I think typically we do not expect from third party and independent candidates. So I think the question that some people have is, why did you decide to run, given the fact that there are already candidates running outside the two-party system? And I'm curious to hear if there was one particular issue in general that actually made that decision for you.
Yeah, great questions. And, you know, I think we are in the perfect storm right now for breaking up the duopoly, because the duopoly's been breaking us for decades. And I think it's reached absolutely intolerable levels. And I think our campaigns in 2012 and 2016 were really, you know, ahead of the curve. They were really calling it like it is, that we need to challenge empire and oligarchy, and our lives actually depend on this more and more. And I think, you know, the people listening in this audience, you know that better than anybody, you know, that we are facing crushing inequality, endless war, which is endangering and impoverishing all of us, and a climate crisis, as well as an assault on our democracy and a few other, you know, incredible crises. But they're all kind of converging, and they're not getting better. And I was hopeful that Cornel West would be our candidate. And, you know, so I was not planning to run, but I thought it was really important for us to keep building that movement, and that movement which has the capacity to really challenge power. And at the end of the day, you can't challenge power unless you're on the ballot. So I was very excited about us kind of converging on the ballot in 51 states, that is counting DC as a state, that we would really run an unstoppable, time-urgent campaign. And because the Greens have done this many times, and in our 2016 race, we were on the ballot for about 95% of voters in 47 states. We know how to do this. We've done it before. We have the culture of challenging power and using the ballot and our democratic rights, small d democratic, to do that. And when Dr. West decided that, in his words, he wanted to speak directly to the voters, did not want to have to go through the administrative red tape and stuff that goes with a party. He hadn't previously been a member of the party, so I can't blame him one bit. It's very hard to suddenly plunge into party politics, especially in the middle of a campaign, especially high-pressured, you know, a total pressure cooker of a campaign like a presidential race. So I totally understand why that was a very difficult fit. So it didn't work out, and he's continued on, which I think is great. His voice is very important, but at the end of the day, he's going to have a very hard time actually challenging power. The Greens have about $4 million worth of ballot lines at this point. We have another $1 million worth to go, but we're very close. And we have most of the really tough states already done and behind us. And we have a very strong tradition of fighting these battles as Greens in the various states, including the ones where we still have work to do. So I think it's extremely likely, it's a virtual certainty that we are going to be on the ballot and challenging power. The other independent candidates, it's a big question right now whether they will be able to raise the money and jump through the hoops that the system as it's currently set up requires you to do. So there are wonderful candidates, and we have much common cause with them, and I hope we have lots of opportunities to collaborate. But at the end of the day, we're quite confident that we're going to be on the ballot. And the other independent candidates, it's not clear at all at this point. And, you know, especially for, you know, RFK has a big apparatus derived from his family name, essentially, and from his traditional Democratic Party ties. So he has a lot of momentum. Will he be able to get on the ballot? It's still not certain. But for a newcomer who's really practicing a politics of integrity, as Dr. West does, it's very hard to see how he gets from here to there. Okay, so we want to fight this battle, in so many words. If we want to have a pro-worker, anti-war, climate emergency agenda front and center in this election and on the ballot across the nation contesting for power, we had to run. So I stepped up because I'm the one candidate who could do that in the short period of time that we had. And when Dr. West left the Greens, we had a very short time interval before we had to seek ballot access in California. And there were all kinds of hoops we had to jump through in order to do that really, really fast. So Ajamu Baraka and I had a big ongoing fight as to who was going to run. And I was trying to get him to run, and he was trying to get me to run, and he won. But it's not over because, you know, we still have the VP to think about, and he's very involved. So this is a mutual run. It was a mutual decision. We put out a statement to the press at the time that Dr. West left the Green Party. And that's what we said. We're here to build a movement that can actually challenge power. And we've spent a couple decades learning how to do that, learning how to wield the power of the ballot line. And if we were to throw that away and not do that in this election, then decades worth of work would be done, and there would be no voice that's fighting for working people, for a climate we can survive in, and to end the empire that would be on the ballot. And if we're going to really challenge power, we've got to be on the ballot.
Okay, so one thing I want to point out is because I want to come back to the Cornel West thing in a second, but one thing I want to point out is your campaign platform. I just want to show this to people on JillStein2024.com. These are the key factors here: a just economy, and here you mention having an economic bill of rights, a living wage job, housing, food, healthcare, education, and more. Of course, you mentioned a real Green New Deal, as we would expect that with a Green Party platform, and also creating jobs through this Green New Deal jobs as well. There's also freedom, equality, and justice for all. And you talk about liberty, justice, and addressing systemic discrimination against women, Black and brown people, Indigenous people, immigrants, people with disabilities, and the LGBTQIA plus community and other marginalized groups. And there's peace and global human rights, where you talk about the military contractors, lobbyists, politicians, et cetera, international law. And you also mentioned apartheid, which is important at this point in time, considering what's happening in Gaza. And last but not least, real democracy to empower the people. We need to revive our democracy with the full spectrum of reforms to empower the people, including real choice on the ballot, because without freedom of choice in elections, there's no democracy. So one of the things that I noticed, and I've mentioned this to other candidates that are running for president that have come onto the show as well, and I also said this to Cornel West and Davi, et cetera, because we do live we're in this society now where a lot of people just have limited, I don't know limited span of attention, so to speak. One of the things that I did recommend to them is I feel like bullet points are more efficient, just so people, particularly, I think a lot of us that are millennials and Gen Z, we're less likely to read through paragraphs. And whereas if you just have bullet points, we just go 1, 2, 3, 4, bam, 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 that really helps us a lot. And the other thing that I would mention is details. So like, for example, when you say the right to have a living wage job, what do you think a living wage should be in the United States today? So these are just some of the things that I did notice in reference to the platform. And I know your website just started, so things could change or whatever. You could be still working on it. But that is one thing that I've heard back from viewers on Call-In, other presidential candidates that I've interviewed. They want to know, they just want to be able to go to the website and see the issues just listed out. And more specifically, like when you talk about freedom, equality, and justice for all, like what does that include? So for example, would that include like reparations, particularly cash reparations for those that are American or African-American descendants of slavery, et cetera? So I think those are the kind of things that some people are looking for. And I just wanted to get your perspective about that.
So we're on exactly the same page here. And reparations, by the way, has always been a part of our campaigns and green campaigns, starting with, I think it was 2012, when our national campaign first put it on national, on the national stage, really. So absolutely. And you'll notice that our website does not say platform. It's not a platform. It's only principles. So it's just kind of a framework of the basic values. And we are working on that platform and hope to have it up in the next couple of weeks, maybe 2, maybe 3, can't say exactly, but we are working fast and furious to get it up as soon as possible. And I think our format is, in fact, bullets, because I agree with you. It's just much easier to digest.
Okay, another thing I have for you, Jill, is that, things have changed since Bernie suspended his campaign in 2020. I think a lot of us that are leftists, that feel like we were betrayed by Bernie Sanders and members of the squad. There is a segment of the leftist population that at this point in time, they're not as willing to try electoral politics, at least on a national level at all, because they feel like it's corrupt. We've talked about the corruption before, but they feel like because we were betrayed by people like Bernie and the squad. But then there is the other section of the left that does want to participate, but only in third party or independent races on the national level. What would your campaign do to win over those groups of leftists that maybe came from that Bernie movement, maybe some of them that supported you in 2016, that are just reluctant to participate in electoral politics on a national level at all because of what has happened with Bernie and the squad? How would you win over those voters?
I'd say that it hasn't been a problem in the past. Once the campaign actually gets going and we are out there doing a really hard-hitting, on the ground, frontline communities, grassroots campaign. And that's what we've always done. And that's what we will be starting to do very soon. And I think, people really want, I don't want to say hope, because hope doesn't do it. People really want to feel empowered and they want to feel lifted up. And that's the job, in my view, of any campaign, is to lift up the social movements, to give them a voice, to put them front and center, and, to build a common cause. And I think absolutely you'd be nuts to vote for the parties that have betrayed you and the people that have betrayed you. And I'm glad to say that's never been any campaign that I've been involved in. or anyone who's been a part of these campaigns. So, you know, I don't think people have to jump suddenly because a new campaign has announced. I think, you know, for people who don't have a relationship with us and who really want to see us prove our worth, I have no question that that's going to be proven across the board, starting soon.
For this particular campaign, are you going to be working with the same campaign, you know, advisors that you had in 2016, or are you starting completely new with a new team, new perspective?
So there are some people who've been a part of the team for a long time. I'd say most of the team is new since 2016, and it's a really great and exciting team. And I'd say hold on to your hat, and you're going to see some really great stuff starting soon.
Okay.
And in fact, I'd say starting already, you know, because what we put out by way of the 2 video statements that we've done, I think gives you a flavor for what we're about and what we're fighting for.
So this is going back to the Cornel West situation. Like, obviously, I want to address the elephant in the room. A lot of us did see you were a part of the team that brought Cornel West over to the Green Party. I think a lot of us got really excited when he was running as a Green, because we knew that you guys did have experience running presidential campaigns. And then there's also the ballot access perspective to that as well. And then, as we all know, you were also the one that recommended Peter Dow to work with Cornel West's campaign. Ultimately, though, the decision did come down to Dr. Westlake deciding whether or not to hire Peter. But then later on, we did see that Dr. West decided to leave the Green Party. I talked to him about that. I talked to you about that. Both of you came onto the show to discuss it. And then not too long after that, Peter Dow did decide to resign from the Cornel West campaign. Some people, since the announcement of your presidential campaign, some people are now wondering if your decision to choose Peter Dow to work with Dr. West's campaign was in an effort to sabotage the campaign. Now, this isn't necessarily what I believe, but these are just some of the things that have come my way before this interview. And I want to get your take on that, because the way that the events have unfolded, it does give some people that perspective that, well, maybe this was just to sabotage Dr. West. So I want to hear your take on that.
So the facts speak for themselves. I introduced Peter Dow, who's a friend and has been a friend and collaborator for years with many people in the Green Party. And I introduced him to Dr. West and his team very early in the campaign, because I did not want to be a campaign manager, but I felt like we couldn't leave Dr. West without a team. We had persuaded him to come on board, and now he didn't have a team. So, you know, I sort of was cornered into being a campaign manager for a while. And I introduced them to Peter because he was one of the few people with experience on a national level who was willing to share that experience with independents and Greens, because people who want to protect their relationship to power don't do that, because you will be blacklisted forever and your career is over the minute you do that. And Peter is one of the few people who has been sharing campaign management skills with Greens for a while. So I thought it was really important for the Wests to know about him. But truth to tell, I did not recommend that Peter take any position in particular, or that they even hire him. What I did was introduce him. And so for people to say that like there was some kind of conspiracy that brought him in, that's ridiculous, because it was me that brought him to the Wests. And if you think I'm the Democratic Party, well, you know, heaven help us. So I introduced him, and they kind of didn't exactly hit it off great. And that was the end of it for 3 months. And then suddenly, they called Peter to say, would you, and they were doing their own search. they have plenty of connections to the Democratic Party and the Bernie campaign and all that. They were doing their own search and they couldn't find anybody. I don't know what was going on there because I was not privy to that. I don't know if they found people they liked and they were turning them down, or if they just didn't find people that they liked. But for one reason or another, they didn't come up with anybody. And then suddenly 3 months later, they decided on their own free will, without any input from me and without any input from Peter Dow, they decided they were going to hire him. So that's how that happened. And I had basically stepped away from that campaign and was kind of progressively doing so. I was no longer acting campaign manager. And then I was playing a less and less active role because it was just clear to me that it was not, you know, sort of the kind of concerted team party approach that I was accustomed to and had expected. So I was kind of moving to the outskirts of the campaign. And then I heard, I wasn't consulted, I heard that they were going to leave. And Peter was leaving along with Dr. West. And my understanding is that Dr. West, he is his own person and he makes up his own mind, and he might tell you about it in advance or he might not. And generally the way things worked was that we would hear about decisions after they were made. And Dr. West is making them based on his own kind of moral compass. And he's got a very strong moral compass. So far be it from me to challenge his decisions. But that's how decisions were made. And I expect that's how this decision got made. And that was that. And once I left, once they left the Greens and I left that campaign, Ajamu and I, at the same time, we got to work to ensure that we were not going to let our challenge to empire and oligarchy fall through the cracks. So that's how it happened. It really had, you know, I don't see Peter Dow as having been the prime mover here in anything. That's not how Dr. West works. Dr. West is in full possession of his faculties, and he makes, you know, his very principled assessment of the situation. He consults his family, who's very important to him and are his closest advisors, and he makes decisions. And I think he is, you know, he is a powerful and courageous voice, however he chooses to participate in this election.
Yes, and for those who are not aware, to be fair, Dr. West did come on and talk about that and did say that this was his decision. I think one question that I do have, though, is that I know that there aren't many people that have this experience that are willing to manage like third party or independent campaigns. I totally understand that. But I think that the Green Party in the past has found people that are able to do that. So, for example, your campaign manager now, or your campaign managers that you've had before, could you explain to people the difference between the type of campaign manager that you had and what the West campaign was looking for, just so people understand? Because what people are going to hear is, well, we heard that there weren't many people that were available for this job that knew how to do this job. So in comes Peter Dow. But we also know that the Green Party has ran presidential campaigns before, and Peter Dow was not a part of that equation. Could you explain the difference between a campaign manager for your particular campaign in the Green Party versus maybe what Cornel West was looking for?
So first, I want to really honor the staff that we've had in the past who've had to learn, you know, from the grassroots up. And there's a whole body of knowledge that generally does not cross over from the high-powered national campaigns, you know, the 30, 50, $100 million campaigns. They have a whole other set of skills and resources that they use, especially for digital organizing. And as Greens, it's been very hard to learn those skills, but people are learning them. And, you know, back, what is it now? I don't know, 6 months ago, whatever, you know, I could not find anyone who had a handle on kind of the latest expanse of digital techniques that I thought would be a good fit with the chemistry of the West campaign. And let me say, it's a whole different ball game when you're working on your own campaign than when you're trying to help somebody else and figure it out. So I brought in everyone I could think of that I thought would be worth their considering. And there were others besides Peter Dow that I also brought to them. I brought to them, for example, Dimitri Lascaris. I don't know if you know him. He's a Green in Canada who is, you could say, second in the leadership of the Canadian Party and has challenged the old school Greens of the Canadian Green Party and has been doing really a great job. And he has run, you know, his own campaign and managed other parliamentary campaigns. That I can't even remember how far that got, but it became clear that that just wasn't, the chemistry wasn't right there, and he didn't have enough knowledge of how things work here in the US. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I think people who, I think this is what really inside baseball and not where we need to be spending a lot of time, kind of these boring details of how you make administrative decisions in campaigns. You know, get involved with one if you dare. You know, it's like the least interesting part of campaigns, and there's sort of a whole discipline and study that goes with it, and it's not intuitive. It's not like logical. A lot has to do with what you've done before and how you've done. We had many managers in my last campaign. It was too big a campaign for any of us. We had not had experience at that level. So we were always kind of chasing our tail, and we were always trying to keep up with things that we had never had to deal with before. And, you know, it's even more true now. And it was with Dr. West's campaign, and it is now for our campaign. But, you know, by hook or by crook, we've managed to put together an incredible team. And we brought on people that I hadn't worked with before. And knock on wood, it's going really well. And we have not been knocking our heads against those limits as of yet. And I have a great deal of trust and excitement about our current team.
Awesome. Yeah, I ask these questions because people are more hesitant nowadays than they were 2020 Bernie campaign, 2016 your campaign, and the 2016 Bernie campaign. People are more hesitant now and more reluctant now because of everything that happened with like Bernie Sanders and the squad. But I guess one other question.
Let me just say, if I can say, that's been going on forever. You know, I mean, the Democratic Party has been playing dirty politics as far back as I can remember. And you can look at, for example, how they sabotaged their own peace candidate. You know, the peace community managed to ram a peace candidate through the Democratic Party process. McGovern, I think it was, you know, way back in the 60s, and he was absolutely sabotaged. And there have been reasons for people to feel absolutely betrayed and sabotaged by the parties of Wall Street and the war machine forever. And each generation kind of comes to this, you know, this rude awakening by the latest experience. But there's nothing new here. This is how the empire works. And we cannot allow its treachery to undermine our own struggle for power. It's very important that we struggle for power, regardless of what they do. And it's unfortunate that people get sweet-talked into supporting them in the first place. And I have to say, Greens do not do that. You know, the Greens who you know, who buy into the lesser evil mythology have long since left the Greens. They're just not part of this movement anymore. You know, we have a thick skin and we contest for power and we get sabotaged for it. You can go all the way back to the Free Soil Party, I think it was, you know, the first abolition parties that were called spoilers and were smeared and sabotaged. And that's the way this business works. And power is going to pull out all the stops to sabotage its competition. That will continue happening. And the sooner people, you know, step up to the defiant movement that we have to be. And I would encourage people, find your niche wherever it is, whether it is the social movements or electoral politics. I personally think they're both essential. One cannot substitute for the other. And I've seen them both get tricked and sidelined. So, you know, there has to be a tag team approach in my mind. And I wouldn't let the betrayals by the mainstream parties, by the parties of war on Wall Street, don't let their shit, you know, influence what you're doing inside of our movement. Our movement is different. It has to be.
Yes, I've definitely seen that in organizing spaces as well. I've seen organizing spaces get infiltrated as well. So one question I do have in reference to the general election, this time around it's going to be different because in 2016, those of us that maybe were supporting Bernie, we knew that it was obvious the DNC by that point, they were not going to let Bernie Sanders have the nomination, right? So once a lot of people realized that, some people said, you know what, that's it, I'm going to vote for Jill Stein in the general election. And then there were some Bernie supporters that did give in and say, well, I'm going to vote for Hillary Clinton because I don't want Donald Trump, right? So there were people that went either way, and then some people just sat at home. This time around, though, what's going to be different is that we're looking at potentially yourself, Dr. West, and RFK Jr. all in the general election. We have Joe Biden, who is polling terribly. He dropped 11 points in October just among Democratic voters alone. Of course, we have Donald Trump running again, who is still leading the Republican Party candidates. I think what some people have the question of is, if I'm on the left, now I feel like we're going to be splitting left votes between Dr. West and Jill Stein. And I want to hear, how do you feel about that? Or is this just going to come down to primarily ballot access, in your opinion?
Yeah, totally. I think, you know, I think there's very little daylight between Dr. West's agenda and priorities and ours. The difference is whether we have the capacity to get on the ballot. And so I would just say, you know, hold on to your hat and let's see how it goes. I have no doubt that we are going to do at least as well as we did in 2016. And that means being on the ballot in just about every state. And I don't know whether Dr. West is on the ballot yet. It's going to be a very tough row to hoe. That's not to say his voice isn't extremely valuable, no matter what his ballot status is. His voice is powerful, courageous, and, you know, really charts a course, I think, for candidates and voters alike. But when it comes to casting your vote, you may not have all the choices that one would hope. So I'd say, let's see.
Right. I want to pivot to this point about Israel and Gaza.
And one other point, which is that there is always the potential for collaboration on the Green Party ticket.
I'm gonna come back to that because I have that later on. Israel and Gaza, along with your announcement video, you released another video that called for an investigation into the Biden administration, particularly about this issue. If you were president, along with calling into that investigation in reference to Joe Biden, if you were president, how would you handle this issue with Israel and Gaza right now? Would you call for a ceasefire? Would you call for the end of the occupation with the Palestinian people? And what would you do in reference to the U.S. government's relationship with Israel and sending arms to Israel as well?
Great question. This is really the question of the hour. And I think that the US of A needs to do the right thing. And we need to join the community of nations insisting on the application of international law. And it's shameful. We have been violating our own laws by providing aid and military assistance to a country which has been flagrantly violating human rights and international law for decades. And, you know, especially with the blockade of Gaza for the last, 16 years, whatever, you know. So, I mean, there's just no question. And then you can go back further to the issues of displacement and ethnic cleansing that goes way back. So it's really unfortunate that the US has basically given a blank check, not only the dollars that we've supplied, I think it's 160 billion, which tops all other aid given to other countries over the past many years. It's really unfortunate that we've given a blank check in dollars and we've given an ethical blank check and have basically been providing political cover for what is a horrific, flagrant violation of international law and seems to be now a clear-cut case of genocide taking place before our very eyes. And I think we must do everything in our power. And let's see, sorry, my camera cut out there for a second. Are you seeing me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I think that what is going on in Gaza is absolutely horrifying right now. The assault, the nonstop bombing for 30 plus days. I mean, this is potentially the worst bombing campaign that's ever been inflicted on any sector of the planet. The denial of food and water to the residents of Gaza, the denial of medical care, the attack on hospitals, the attack on the press, the attack on refugee centers and schools. It's just jaw-dropping. I think it's traumatizing just watching it. So one can only imagine what this means for the people of Gaza. And I have to say, this is also a disaster for the people of Israel because it is alienating much of their support. It's a huge wake-up call to people who have been supporting the Netanyahu agenda, which is absolutely horrific. And this has poisoned the waters for Israel in the international community and especially with its neighbors, where the Arab countries that had made peace arrangements and diplomatic arrangements, Jordan, Egypt, Bahrain, I mean, they've all now basically broken ties with Israel. And arguably many are now, contemplating becoming involved in the fight. And this is terrifying and puts us all at risk here. I mean, everybody in the Middle East, but it goes way beyond the Middle East. And we ourselves, the US has sent a nuclear submarine to the region. Now, few people, especially our reckless and irresponsible misleaders, understand what the risks of a nuclear submarine are. Very few people know that a nuclear submarine, just one of them, contains the equivalent of approximately 4,000 Hiroshima bombs. Imagine 4,000 Hiroshima bombs going off anywhere. Well, one of the things that that means, and that's not to say that that's the most likely scenario, but this is a possible scenario. There's 4,000 Hiroshima bombs worth of ammunition sitting off the coast. If that were to be discharged, that spells nuclear winter sufficient to kill 1 out of every 3 residents of planet Earth. The firepower contained in one nuclear submarine is outrageous. It should not exist. It should not be brought to this tinderbox of a conflict in the first place. But this also underscores, how incredibly reckless and irresponsible and criminal our leaders are in this country to be introducing nuclear weapons into this struggle, let alone to be manufacturing nuclear submarines in the first place, which of course are being brought now to the conflict zones around China as well. So, to my mind, this underscores why the Israel-Gaza, it's not a conflict, it's an assault. The assault of Israel on Gaza is, it's a microcosm of what's wrong with empire and how empire really puts us all at risk right now, our lives, our health, our future. And in this struggle, you know, I sort of feel like as Gaza goes, we all go, you know, are we going to have the laws of nations, or are we going to have the law of the jungle? Which is going to prevail? And Israel has been given a blank check to apply the law of the jungle, but the US also uses the law of the jungle. I mean, how did we conduct our wars, you know, in Iraq and so on, you know, and we conveniently use the terms now instead of international law, you know, the Biden administration talks about rules-based orders. Whose rules? Our rules, rules that we can change day by day. You know, that's called the law of the jungle, when your rules basically are self-serving and, you know, and free-flowing. And, you know, this puts us all at risk. We need to we need to get back to, you know, to the progress that was made following the catastrophe of the Second World War before we stumble our way. I shouldn't say we, and I shouldn't say stumble. I should say before the war profiteers push us. I mean, just look at the way we've transitioned from the war in Ukraine, which was suddenly it was so important to all of us, you know, that we prosecute that war. And now suddenly we have a shiny new war. So forget that war. Let's fight this one instead. You know, it's like what stronger demonstration is there that these wars really are being conducted for the benefit of the war predator industry? And, you know, this is an endemic problem in the way the US government, the Congress, the presidency, and so on are determined and how they function. So, you know, this is why we need a democratic revolution, a peaceful, small d democratic revolution, and standing up for human rights and international law in the Israel genocide against Gaza is part of not only Gaza's future, this is part of all of our future.
Jill, and I want to speak to the censorship issue around this particular topic as well. I don't know if you've seen this, but Bill Ackman has been on a roll here. For those who are not aware, Bill Ackman is a billionaire hedge fund manager. He's also one of the donors for RFK Jr.'s campaign. He posted this earlier today. What percentage of the student protesters who support Hamas are not U.S. citizens? Why do we want them taking the place of American citizens at our most prestigious universities? So he's criticizing MIT there. And to me, when I see this, this comes across to me as a dog whistle, taking the place of American citizens at our most prestigious universities. Obviously, these students, and I've worked at these schools, I've worked at MIT, I've worked at Harvard. Obviously, students are not you know, endorsing Hamas. They're calling for an end of the occupation of the Palestinian people. But people like Bill Ackman, who does have a large following, particularly on Twitter, are very well known. Again, hedge fund billionaire. He's presenting this in such a way that it makes it seem like that is what these students are doing when that is not what they are doing. These are some of the same people that said we need to have free speech. And now all of a sudden, when you change the country in reference to Ukraine and you swap in Israel, all of a sudden, those same people like Bill Ackman and people like RFK Jr. are now wanting to censor students for having these protests in asking for the removal of the occupation of the Palestinian people. What do you say to that? The censorship issue around this? We just saw Rashida Tlaib was just censured in the House for advocating for her people. And you yourself, you are Jewish. I'm pretty sure you would not agree with the censure of Rashida Tlaib. How would you handle this particular situation where they're calling for the censorship of people who are trying to fight for Palestinian struggle?
So, you know, I think it's really important to point out here that you know, these are our basic values of democracy and human rights that are on the line right now. And people who are witnessing genocide in Gaza are broadly horrified. You know, even before the worst of these assaults was apparent, it was like 66% of the American public that was calling for a ceasefire, while it was only 3% of Congress. You know, I mean, that tells you the incredible divide between people and our elected misleaders. I I have not seen polls on, on the censorship, and, people may be buying into that because it seems less dramatic and less harmful. But it's really important for us to stand up for basic civil rights and civil liberties, because it may be Palestinians today, or Palestinian human rights, but, it will be, it could be anybody tomorrow. And, I think both Glenn Greenwald and Brianna Joy Gray have been doing a really magnificent job of, just really digging in deep on what the stakes of this discussion are. And I think many Americans, will be reminded of the importance of our rights of free speech and our rights of protest and the rights of press freedom, and our rights to not be of privacy, our rights not to be surveilled. We are all at risk here in the violation. A militarized society is not just dangerous to our foreign enemies. The assault is then everyday people here at home. So we have to stand up to this authoritarian militarism, which is extremely anti-democratic. And it's very important that we stand up for the rights of free speech. I mean, if you can't have a debate about a war at a college, what is a college for? What is an education for? So absolutely, and it's so outrageous that an effort is being made right now to conflate anti-Zionism or opposition to the Israeli government's assault. You don't even have to talk about Zionism at this point. Let's just look at this war and this genocide that's happening before our very eyes. To object to that is not anti-Semitism. The two have absolutely nothing to do with each other. And, Democracy Now! Recently featured an 87-year-old woman who was a victim and whose family was a victim of the Holocaust, who's been out there advocating, just beautiful, because she went through the same thing. She went through, I think for her, it was like 11 days of bombing straight in Germany, where I think she was in hiding at the time. She didn't have access to the tunnels during the bombing, which was going on it was being conducted by the US and the UK at the time, nonstop, 24 hours a day for like 11 days. And, and they were also dropping white phosphorus, and people were being lit up like candles, as she described it. It's just like unbelievable, the horror. She's been through the horror as a Jew fleeing, the Nazi persecution and Holocaust as a child, as a 7-year-old. And, to hear it in her words, it's so compelling. And then for her to talk about how let us not, inflict on others what was done to us. It's like sort of the basic golden rule. Let's do unto others here. If we can't do that, how do we ever move forward? How do we ever get past our conflicts? In the words of Gandhi, it's an eye for an eye until we're all blind. And what we're seeing happen here is not an eye for an eye. It's like hundreds of eyes for an eye. It's just horrifying. This is not how we're going to have a livable world, especially in the presence of nuclear weapons. We are heading straight into the mushroom cloud here, if we cannot get a grip and invoke our higher selves to a higher humanity, which is what we've got. That's the route we've got to go.
I was at one of the protests here in Boston, and one of the speakers was from the Steelworkers Union. And he was very, very vocal speaker. And he said during his speech that they always stood in solidarity with the Palestinian struggle. And that got me to thinking about the worker unions and also worker co-ops. And I'm wondering, with your campaign this time around, would you be interested in collaborating with any of the unions or people who are trying to unionize, and those that are interested in starting worker co-ops as well? For example, Professor Richard Wolff, he talks about worker co-ops quite often. Shama Sawant has workers strike back, so she's been trying to unionize or help unionize workers across the country. Do you see any opportunity for that to be implemented as part of your campaign?
Absolutely, because one of our, kind of the three pillars of our campaign, crushing inequality, endless war, and climate collapse. And then, democracy is kind of the overarching issue there. But, each of those issues is a very central focus. And they're all interdependent. We're not going to solve one of them unless we're also solving the others. And so, in terms of, what role does, worker empowerment, strong unions, co-ops, what does that play? It's a huge role, and it's always been a huge part of our campaigns. It's a key part of the Green New Deal. In fact, even going back as far as 2012, we called for an entire federal agency to support cooperative development as an alternative to, to sort of the current paradigm. And we need to support it, not only network with those that exist, but we need really better institutional support so that we can move the economy in a much more sound and just direction that empowers workers 24 hours a day, not just when you cast a vote or something like that. The workplace needs to be a place of empowerment for workers. Absolutely. Very excited to get going on that.
And that takes me back to the pandemic. I was thinking about some of the people, particularly here in Massachusetts, because Massachusetts is one of the states that was locked down. I'm thinking about some of the people that lost their businesses, the small businesses that had to close permanently here in Massachusetts because of the lockdowns. I think about people that lost their jobs here because of that as well. And one of the questions that has come up a couple of times, I talked to Green Party members on the show about this before. There was a statement that was issued by the Green Party about the mandates. And then the Black Caucus of the Green Party came forward with their own statement where they were actually not in support of mandating, we call the jab on the show, Jill, mandating the jab for people in order to, maintain their job, et cetera. What is your position about that particular issue? And if we were to face another pandemic in the future, where would you stand in reference to locking down states or mandates, et cetera?
So, I'm not favorably disposed towards mandates as a rule. And, until COVID, the sort of accepted public health approach was not pro-mandate. It was that you need to have regulatory agencies that people trust, and that that people are willing to be guided by. And you want to be in a situation where you're not forcing medical treatments on people, which is a horrible idea from the get-go. And in the many decades preceding this, that was just assumed that our regulatory agencies had respect and support. Now, our regulatory agencies have been very subject to corporate capture. And, you can look at, for example, the opioid crisis and the permissions that were written actually by the Sackler family themselves that enabled opioids to be marketed the way that they were. So this was a clear-cut case of, of corporate capture. Or you may recall there was a medication called Vioxx, which was a so-called NSAID, a non-steroidal like naproxen or ibuprofen, something like that. This was like another version of that. It caused something like 28,000 heart attacks, which the FDA knew about and which they were suppressing before it was taken off the market. And the guy who was the whistleblower, they tried to expose and, marginalize. So that was another case of corporate capture. And unfortunately, it's not, or look at kind of the revolving door between like Monsanto and the FDA. Michael Taylor, I think it was, who had a high position in the FDA, and then he would kind of move back and forth between the FDA and high corporate positions in Monsanto. We need to shut down the revolving door. We need to create publicly funded elections and get big money out of the business of strangling our electoral system. that needs to happen in and of its own right. And one of the benefits of that is that people can then again begin to trust our agencies. Not that they should ever have a blank check. I mean, agencies should always be required to explain themselves, but they wouldn't kind of come with this cloak of corruption that surrounds them now. And I think we have to get down to some basic principles here so that our society works. You know, as a medical doctor, when the COVID stuff first started happening and members of my family who are healthcare providers were very much on the front lines, I took several weeks out and I just read the literature, and I became very convinced on the basis of longstanding studies that they were far better off, that people who were at high risk for exposure were far better off getting vaccinated than not. And, you know, and that was my recommendation to them. But of course, they didn't need my recommendation. They were making their own decisions. But I rested very easy with that and made kind of my own decisions about being vaccinated. But I'll tell you, the tradition of medicine that I was trained in, I'm kind of old school. The tradition of medicine I'm trained in is that you review the data. You review the data yourself and you get comfortable with it, especially for new things. I had one medical director who said, never be the first person to adopt a new medication and never be the last one either. You know, you can look at some of the like simplest, most basic treatments, and they are changing all the time. So it's not like this is always kind of nefarious influence peddling. There's just a lot of discovery that happens, and it kind of happens willy-nilly, and you get one good study and then it will replace another good study. So you have to be constantly reevaluating this stuff. And it's very hard to do if you don't do this full time and have a whole lot of expertise, which is why we need agencies that we can trust, that can be, you know, reviewing this data constantly, which is the way it has to be, you know. And we need to have research which is sponsored by a non-partisan public interest that's not sponsored by pharmaceutical companies who have a stake in the outcome. You know, we just have to go back to basic principles here and do the science right.
All right, Jill, I have 2 more questions for you. What would be the plan, I think, particularly with your campaign, because you can't speak for the entire Green Party, obviously, but with your campaign, one of the issues that has been raised with the Green Party before from other people I've interviewed on the show is that they feel like the Green Party needs to find a way to expand its base to appeal to African-American voters in the United States, because the Democratic Party has a stronghold on the African-American community, although things have been changing recently this year where more African-Americans are leaving the Democratic Party. But what do you think you could do in reference to your campaign to change that, to bring more African-Americans over to the Green Party or just the third party in general, and to get people to realize that you're not really winning anything by supporting this 2-party system?
Yeah, well, I think the 2-party system is making a great case for doing that itself right now, you know, and that's really great. And we're seeing that. I mean, unfortunately, we're seeing people of color support Trump and the Republicans, you know, so it's really important that we get the word out that there are other options, you know, and the worst case scenario, you know, they don't have to rush to the worst case scenario here, you know, that is supporting Trump or supporting Republicans. Not that that's worse than the Democrats. I mean, in my view, they're different kinds of worse. I don't think there is a lesser evil right now. I think there is a greater good, you know, and that's what we represent in the Green Party. And people need to start prioritizing the greater good and stepping up to a future that actually works for us all. In 2016, you know, Ajamu Baraka and I had a very grassroots frontlines community campaign, and we were able to really reach out to African-American voters. After our race, you know, there was just not good stuff that happened inside the Green Party, and looking back on it myself, I wonder how much you know, interference, purposeful interference that was going on, because there was quite a bit of it. And I think we have to be prepared for that in advance and be prepared to actually defend our gains in this next race and to continue moving forward. And I think now we have a much better sense of how to do that if there is some kind of infiltration and sabotage going on. But in terms of like how to work the election, I think we know how to do that. And we did that in 2016. And my presumption is that I'm going to be running with a running mate, from the community of color, and that we're going to have a very exciting journey ahead.
So that brings me to my final question. A lot of people are trying to guess or speculate who your running mate could be. If I had to guess, I would assume maybe Jamu. Other people that have been mentioned have been Margaret Kimberly, although I don't even know if Margaret Kimberly wants to be a politician, but her name has been thrown that way. And then last but not least, like when you talked about collaborating, one of the big pushes that are coming from people via email to me is, why don't Jill Stein and Cornel West actually collaborate together? So I wanted to get your take on that.
I could see that. I could totally see that. And, I could see that from the minute that Cornel went off to do a different kind of race. It was kind of in my mind like, oh, that's what a VP does. They don't have to worry about the party dynamics and that kind of stuff. They're just off and talking to the voters. And that's kind of what Cornel wants to do here. So yeah, I would say it's definitely, it's an open book right now. And, and again, I want to affirm Cornel's race in and of its own right, and, support it and support the importance of it. I feel like our campaign right now is running in the lane that he cleared. He really did a lot of work to clear this lane. And I am very grateful to him for, having been there in a really courageous way to assert our right to people-powered choices. And he continues to do that. And that's great. And could we be doing it together at some point? Way back in 2016, I had tried to get Cornel to run as a VP.
I did not know that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, I had really worked on him, and Chris Hedges was helping us, and he did not want to be a candidate at the time.
Wow. Interesting. Interesting. Well, I sincerely hope, I wish you the best, Jill. I will say, I do think next year, I think some people are more excited going into it, this particular presidential race, because I do think, again, based on what I've seen just from the polls so far, and I know it's still early, I do think next year could be that chance for third-party independent races to cause some type of friction in the duopoly.
Yeah, totally. Really looking forward to it. And I encourage people, go visit us at jillstein2024.com and join the team.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, Jill.
Thank you so much, Sabby. Good to talk.
Bye. All right, guys. Interesting. Yeah, I did not know that that there was an interest in Cornel West in 2016, but that's interesting to hear. I got to tell you guys, I really do feel like next year, if we're going to cause some type of ripple or whatever within the duopoly, I feel like next year is probably our best shot, at least that we've had since I've been able to vote. I don't know. If you guys remember another time, let me know, but I could see that being a possibility. Let me go ahead and go to that comment on Rockfin, and then I'll pick up the ones on YouTube. Thanks so much, Eric. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. If Greens want more Greens in Congress, then maybe they should consider prioritizing running CBIs to create the infrastructure needed so that can happen. What they've been doing for the past 20 years hasn't worked. Maybe they should think about taking another tactic. If they are serious about policy, they should be prioritizing the public interest over the party interest and get these as state policies. That's an interesting point, Roger. And thank you for the tip, Kay. Thank you so much. Thank you, Hemp Car, for this tip. Navy.mil said they'll power their fleet on seawater, waiting for Stein to debate Diane Sayre. Oh, that would be a good debate. Thank you so much for that. Let me go to some of these comments here. Thank you for the super chat, Gray. Couldn't help but think that no matter who won 2016/2020, Hillary's second term, Trump second, or Bernie first or second, all would have handled Israel/Palestine similarly. I could see that. That's a good point, Gray. Thank you, Scott. Does Jill support signing the Treaty of Prohibition of Nukes? I feel like leftists disregard this important issue, and the USA should be leading the way. Hashtag security through peace. Based on what she was saying about nuclear weapons, she probably does. Thank you, Yin Yang. I think Dr. Jill Stein wants to be president very badly, like more badly than any other candidate out there. That's why I think she is running. Thank you for that. Thank you, Baby Ethernet. Your critical questions are phenomenal, Sabby. Thank you, Baby Ethernet. Thank you, Helpful Harm. That's an interesting name. Dr. West and Claudia de la Cruz have been at the front line and leading many protests and rallies in the past few months. Just a reminder, love, join PSL, guys. Thank you. Thank you, Nayan. Is there any precedent for the Green Party USA to sue the Democratic Party for nominating war criminals? I do not know. So I'm just going to say not that I know of, but I would have to look that up, look into that. That's interesting. And thank you, Victor. All candidates are warmongers. Whoever you vote and put them into office, they all answer to the American war machine. Well, someone has to hold those positions, Victor. I see where you're coming from, though. Thank you, Kenneth. I love Jill. I love Sabby. Thank you. Does Jill have a plan to prevent being handcuffed again, preventing her from participating in debates? Well, you know what should be interesting this time around? Again, I think because there are so many, there's multiple third-party and independent candidates that are running outside the duopoly, and they're getting more attention from the media than I've seen before. That may not even be an issue. Remember, 5% to get the federal funding, 15%, and then you're on the debate stage. So if we're just looking at the polls right now, that means that RFK would already be on the debate stage. So I think like if Jill can get to that 15%, then she wouldn't even have to deal with that issue. But the other thing I would add is cops gonna cop. You know how it is. So cops are gonna. Thank you for the super chat, Landrew. Thank you so much. Thank you for speaking truth, Dr. Stein. I'm on board if you commit to staying to the end, which Green Party candidates typically do, as long as I can remember. Thank you, Derek. Does she agree that African Americans should receive lineage-based reparations for slavery in this country? So I did ask her about reparations earlier on. She said they do agree with that. Plus, that's also a part of the Green Party platform, just FYI. Thank you for the super sticker, Lee. Thank you so much. And thank you again, Baby Ethernet. Cornell should join Jill. That would be powerful. That would be a powerful campaign, huh? And shout out to Joey Peltier for being a Sabby member for 4 months. I think 2028 after 2027 general strike will be a good year. Unfortunately, that is another 4 years of Trump to get the white liberals off the couch. Ouch, Joey, ouch.